Okay, so let's dive into this. We've got a really fascinating collection of source materials you've shared with us.
Yeah, it's quite a range. We're looking at global conflicts, economic stuff, political influence, some really technical geophysics.
Right, about resource exploration.
Exactly. And even a bit of philosophy thrown in there.
So our job today really is to try and navigate all these interconnected pieces, pull out the key insights, and help you see how it all kind of fits together in the world right now.
Think of it like connecting the dots, maybe, between the battlefield, the boardroom, what's deep under the ground.
And maybe even some bigger questions. It's a complex picture.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
So where should we start? The global landscape seems like the obvious place.
Yeah, let's start there. The data on conflicts is pretty stark, isn't it?
It really is. One of the sources looking at ACLE data points to a 25% increase in political violence events between December 2023 and November 2024 compared to the year before.
25%. Wow. That's not a small jump.
No, not at all. We're talking over 194,000 events recorded around the world in that period.
And the human cost.
Yeah, tragically high. Over 233,000 fatalities documented in that same time frame, according to the source.
It's interesting, too, how the sources showed different groups counting these conflicts differently. PureIO reported 59 state-based conflicts in 2023.
Right. Well, the ICRC mentioned over 120 armed conflicts in 2024.
And it highlights how tricky it is just to get a definitive number, doesn't it? Because definitions vary state-based, non-state, internal.
Exactly. Though the sources suggest a count around 61 state-based conflicts seems plausible when you sort of triangulate the methodologies.
Okay. And then looking at specific major conflicts mentioned, the scale is just immense. The Russo-Ukrainian War, for instance.
Yeah, the sources cite BBC estimates of around 112,000 Russian military losses just in 2024.
And President Zelensky reported, 43,000 Ukrainian military deaths by December 2024.
That's the figure cited. Of course, as the sources rightly point out, casualty figures in active conflicts are incredibly difficult to verify independently.
Absolutely. Claims like that 76,000 total deaths figure based on UN methodology, they often need careful validation later on.
Very true. And then there's the war in Gaza. Reuters reported up to 50,000 deaths by early March 2025.
And the estimates mentioned suggest a very high civilian percentage, maybe 60 to 80%.
That's what's cited, yeah. Though the sources are also careful to note that some claims, like figures reaching 98% civilian casualties, seem exaggerated based on available evidence.
It's good they add that context. Amidst all these sort of devastating numbers, there was that interesting tactical detail included.
Oh, yeah, the F-16 incident?
Right. June 7th, 2025, a Ukrainian F-16 working with a Swedish Saab 340 AEW&C.
The airborne radar plane.
Yeah, reportedly shot down a Russian Su-35. It's presented as a pretty significant aerial combat success.
A small event, maybe, but symbolically important in that specific context.
Okay, so shifting from the direct fighting, the sources also really dig into the influence shaping things. Politics, corporations.
Absolutely, power dynamics. The material looks at political figures, specifically mentioning Donald Trump.
Yes, and it reports factually on his stated views, like suggesting Ukraine could have maybe avoided the war and questioning President Zelensky's legitimacy.
The sources also touch on challenges in negotiations, particularly with Iran, mentioning his caution about potential Israeli strikes on their nuclear sites, as reported around May 2025.
And there's a domestic example, too, that reported fallout with Elon Musk.
Right, with threats mentioned about canceling contracts back in June 2025. Shows friction points.
It's also noted that while there were some immigration-related protests in LA and San Francisco, the sources say they didn't really escalate into, widespread unrest or anything like a national collapse. Just worth noting that detail.
It provides a bit of balance. And this idea of influence naturally leads to transnational corporations, TNCs. Their power is just immense.
Okay, this is where it gets really mind-blowing, right? The example used, Walmart's 2023 revenue, over $611 billion.
Yeah, just let that sink in.
$611 billion. You compare that to entire countries. Like Norway, their GDP was around $485 billion. Ukraine's was about $178 billion.
So one company's revenue dwarfing the entire economic output of significant nations.
It's not just a big company, it's like an economic superpower in itself.
It really underscores their global reach and influence. And as the sources explain, these TNCs, often linked with huge investment funds, control a massive chunk of global corporate value.
And that concentration contributes to inequality, global competition.
Exactly. And you see shifts in that competition reflected in things like the Fortune Global 500 list.
Right, the U.S. versus China comparison. China had more companies in 2023.
135 to 121 for the U.S.
But then the U.S. apparently overtook China in 2024. 139 versus 133.
Yeah, a slight shift back is an interesting indicator of those ongoing economic power dynamics.
So how does all this connect? The conflict, the politics, the corporate power, connecting back down to the Earth itself?
Well, through the absolutely critical search for natural resources, energy security is, paramount in this kind of volatile global situation.
For sure. And the sources highlight some potentially massive recent finds, like that estimated 6.1 billion barrels of shale oil in Turkey.
In the Diyarbakir Basin, yeah. And also an estimated 3.6 billion barrels of heavy oil in Ukraine's Rava-Ruska zone.
Though, as the source notes, that Ukraine estimate needs more confirmation.
Definitely needs follow-up. And interestingly, connected to Ukraine's resources, there was that idea mentioned for an economic passport.
Yeah, linking resource money directly to citizens.
But apparently that proposal stalled because of the ongoing war. Shows how conflict disrupts everything, even potential benefits from resources.
So this brings us to the really technical stuff in the sources, how modern geophysics actually helps find these resources. Like high-tech geology detective work.
That's a pretty good way to put it. We're essentially trying to read signals from deep underground.
Right.
One key method discussed is electromagnetic sounding. The basic idea is pretty neat. It links how easily electricity flows through rock, its resistance with how well it holds a charge, its polarizability.
Okay, so resistance and polarizability. And those tell you what exactly?
They tell you a lot about the rock itself and, crucially, about the fluids filling the tiny spaces within the rock. Oil, gas, and salt water have very different electrical properties.
Okay. So you can potentially tell them apart using electricity.
That's the core idea, yeah. The sources use a case study from Poland, the Antonin 1 field, to illustrate it.
Right.
They found a really strong link, a correlation between high resistance and high polarizability in certain rock layers there.
And that specific combination means?
According to the source material, in that context, it's considered almost a direct sign of hydrocarbons, oil or gas.
And they pinpointed specific layers?
Yep, the 7th layer, which is main dolomite, and the 9th layer, Rotlagen sandstone. Both are known types of rock that can hold oil and gas.
And the sources mention geological faults playing a role, too.
Yeah, faults basically, big cracks in the rock layers can act as traps. They can stop oil and gas from migrating further, allowing it to accumulate. You can see that in the diagrams provided.
Okay. And those complex maps they mention, inversion maps.
Look, they're layers like 9, 10, and 11. Those maps are built using data gathered at the surface. Complex algorithms then essentially work backward to create a 3D picture of what the resistance, anisotropy.
Anisotropy, that's resistance varying by direction.
Exactly, vertical versus horizontal resistance. And polarizability look like down below. These maps visually flag the most promising zones.
There was that interesting bit about potential oil showing up even in the granite layer 11 below the sandstone. Granite isn't usually where you find oil, is it?
No, generally is too dense, not porous enough. But the sources use that detail to make a really important point. You have to look at the whole picture, the integrated analysis. You can't just focus on one data point. Well, the granite itself isn't the reservoir if it's fractured near a fault line.
Okay.
Hydrocarbons could potentially migrate into those fractures from other layers. But the main potential they identified is still in those dolomite and sandstone layers above.
Yeah.
It just shows the complexity.
Got it. So interpret everything together.
Precisely. Then there's the second approach described, used in the Tazovsky district, likely in western Siberia.
And colored maps.
Yeah. Basically overlaying colored zones, green, yellow, red, onto topography and structural maps.
So red means X marks the spot, essentially. Highest probability.
Pretty much. It's a very practical way to translate all that complex geophysical data into clear targets for drilling. It helps prioritize exploration, reduce risk, save money.
Makes sense. And this brings us right back to Ukraine and that Rava-Ruska zone proposal.
Exactly. There's a specific source, a proposal dated May 3, 2025, said a Ukraine state oil and gas company, Naftogaz.
And it proposes exploring Rava-Ruska using these kinds of methods.
Yes, it directly links the global resource need, the specific location, and these advanced geophysical techniques.
What's the geological argument they make for Rava-Ruska?
They argue it's geologically similar to a very productive field in Vietnam called White Tiger.
White Tiger. Okay, and what's the similarity?
The proposal suggests that, like White Tiger, Rava-Ruska has tectonic faults and fractured granite rocks. These fractures could create the necessary porosity space to hold oil maybe 10–15%, and permeability, the ability for oil to flow potentially over 50 millidarcy, which is quite good. Ideal conditions for oil to accumulate.
And what techniques do they propose using to find it there?
They mention seismic methods, specifically looking at scattered seismic waves, which can indicate fractured zones, just like they did in White Tiger.
Okay.
And they really emphasized electromagnetic studies, specifically a technology called RALF1.
RALF1, what is that, according to the proposal?
Well, the document says it was developed by a team, including Russian researchers, active from the 70s through the 2010s. It analyzes induced polarization, that property we talked about, how rock holds a charge and relates it to depth.
And they claim high accuracy.
The proposal claims over 85% accuracy and ability to map zones down to 5,000 meters.
So how does it actually pinpoint potential oil or gas?
The proposal explains that the geoelectric properties, resistance, polarizability, change depending on what's in the rock's pores: oil, gas, or water. A hydrocarbon deposit creates a specific electrical anomaly.
A unique signature.
Exactly. So electroprospecting methods like RALF1 are designed to detect these anomalies in the electrostatic field they measure.
And what are the key indicators, the specific signatures they look for with this tech?
The proposal lists three main things. First, a local increase in electrical resistance within the target zone. Second, a decrease in induced polarization compared to nearby water-filled rocks.
Okay, increased resistance, decreased polarization.
And third, an increase in resistivity anisotropy, meaning vertical resistance, is higher compared to horizontal. Seeing these three indicators together is claimed to be a strong sign of hydrocarbons.
And they use this to map out fields, prioritize drilling spots.
That's the idea. Optimize the exploration process.
What about the economics? What potential does the proposal estimate for Rava-Ruska?
The numbers are pretty big. Estimated reserves, 500 million tons, which they equate to 3.6 billion barrels of oil.
3.6 billion barrels. And the value?
At $80 per barrel, they calculate a potential value of $288 billion. They also estimate possible daily production of 20,000 barrels, helped by high natural pressure in the zone, cited as 50–70 MPa.
Wow. And the cost to develop versus the return?
They estimate development costs between $1 and $3 billion for maybe 10 to 20 wells, which sounds like a lot, but compared to the potential reserves,
right,
it's relatively low. With an estimated annual income projection of $584 million, they suggest the initial investment could be paid back pretty quickly.
And the proposal didn't just focus on Rava-Ruska, did it? It mentioned broader potential in Ukraine.
That's right. It gave estimates for Ukraine's granite formations overall, potentially 2 to 5 billion barrels, worth $40 to $80 billion.
And the Ukrainian Shield region?
Even bigger numbers there, 1.5 to 3 billion barrels, with potential net profit estimates over 20 years, ranging quite widely from maybe $61 billion up to $178 billion, depending on various factors. These are proposal estimates, of course.
Of course. Huge potential outline, though. Lastly, the proposal mentions an organization, WROJPD, World Relations Organization for Justice, Peace, and Development.
Yes, the proposal factually states this is an international charity. Its mission is Pro Deo et Patria, inspired by José Rizal.
And its connection to the Rava-Ruska project.
The proposal positions WROJPD as supporting projects like this one, framing them as contributing to stability and prosperity. It explicitly links energy products like this to enhancing energy security and countering Russian expansionism.
Anorama mentions a U.S. agreement opening investment avenues.
Yes, that's noted in the proposal as part of the context and justification for pursuing the project. We're just reporting what's stated in the source document here.
Okay, so we've gone from global conflicts, corporate power, deep into the Earth's crust with geophysics, and then the sources take this unexpected turn, a philosophical reflection.
Yeah, it's quite a shift. There's this short passage using a metaphor.
The drop of water returning to the ocean.
Exactly. Likening human life to that drop, and death to its return to the vast ocean.
And the interpretation given in the source is that this symbolizes, what, the unity of consciousness and an end to suffering?
That's how it's presented. It's a brief, reflective moment that contrasts sharply with all the geopolitical and technical detail. A sort of pause to consider the human condition within it all.
So let's try and pull this all together. What are the big takeaways from this deep dive?
Well, we've certainly seen the stark reality of rising global conflict through the data presented.
Yeah, and the incredible scale of corporate economic power,
Hmm.
sometimes even overshadowing nation-states, plus the ongoing influence of key political figures.
And then there's the critical hunt for resources, driven by energy security needs, especially vital in regions impacted by conflict, like Ukraine.
Which led us into the fascinating world of geophysics, how technology lets us probe deep underground.
Right, using things like electromagnetic sounding to potentially identify huge resource reserves, like those detailed in that Rava-Ruska proposal. The technology offers incredible power to uncover hidden potential.
But, and this is an important point one of the sources made, even with these advanced methods, we're still interpreting indirect data, aren't we?
Absolutely. We're reading signals, looking for anomalies, making interpretations. We're not directly seeing the oil or gas until we drill. There's always uncertainty.
Things could be missed, geological complexities might not be fully captured.
Exactly. Which leads to a really interesting final thought, maybe. How might future technologies change this? Imagine, say, advanced AI analyzing geophysical data in ways we can't yet. Or maybe completely new sensor types giving us different kinds of information about the subsurface.
You mean technologies that could reduce that uncertainty, give us an even clearer picture?
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
But would they just improve resource finding? Or could they also change how we understand these really complex, interconnected global systems? The economics, the politics, the resources that we've been talking about today.
And what new questions or maybe new kinds of uncertainties might those future insights bring?
Precisely. It makes you wonder not just about seeing deeper into the Earth, but seeing the connections between everything else more clearly, too. Or perhaps differently. Something definitely worth thinking about.